He thought it was just a quiet Sunday ride, until flashing lights stopped him cold. A 52-year-old Army veteran, calm and composed, is pulled over without reason by two officers who see just a man on a bike, not the hero beneath the helmet. But when he doesn't show up at a military event he was scheduled to lead, the silence echoes louder than sirens, and help rolls in, 50 vehicles strong. This isn't just about a traffic stop. It's about what happens when you try to embarrass a man who built his life defending others. Watch closely, because respect isn't given, it's earned. And sometimes, it arrives in a Humvee. Want the full story script next? The morning sun glazed the asphalt of Highway 19 as Walter Jennings kicked up dust on his matte black cruiser, the wind tugging gently at his shirt sleeves. At 52, Walter looked like just another middle-aged biker. But if anyone had cared to ask, they would have learned he served 24 years in the U.S. Army, deployed to 3 war zones, and earned medals that were now tucked away in a weathered box back home. But on this quiet Sunday he just wanted peace, the open road, and time before his keynote speech for the local National Guard unit. That peace shattered when 2 police cruisers sped past and suddenly braked sideways in front of him. "Step off." "The bike!" one officer barked, his hand already resting on his holster. Walter calmly shut off the engine. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Plates match a suspect vehicle," the other snapped, not bothering to check ID, not bothering to listen. What followed wasn't rage. It wasn't defiance. Walter simply stood his ground, silent, respectful, motionless, like he had in Kabul, Mosul, and Mogadishu. They patted him down, searched his bags, even insulted the Army logo on his keychain. Onlookers across the street pulled out phones but said nothing. Meanwhile, 14 miles away, the Armory's Master Sergeant looked at his watch. Walter Jennings was never late. Ever. He picked up a radio. 10 minutes later, the rumble of diesel engines broke the summer stillness. Over the hill, 50 National Guard Humvees rolled in formation. American flags snapped in the wind. At the helm of the convoy, Captain Denise Carter, Walter's former platoon mate, stood through the turret, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. She saw everything in a second: the 2 officers, the bike, Walter's steady hands in plain view. The convoy stopped, dozens of soldiers dismounted. No one yelled, no one threatened, but their presence spoke volumes. With cameras now rolling from every porch, the officers froze. Captain Carter stepped down. "This man is a decorated war hero. You just made the kind of mistake that ends careers." Walter didn't gloat, didn't raise his voice. He just looked at the officers and said, "Now do you see me?" The officers mumbled an apology, suddenly small under the weight of 50 stares sharper than bullets. Walter swung his leg back over the bike, nodded to Carter, and kicked off the stand. As he rolled forward, the convoy parted like a royal escort. No sirens, no citations, just a trail of silence left in his wake. Because this wasn't just a ride. It was a reminder. You may forget who someone is, but the world remembers. Walter didn't race off. He cruised slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. Behind him, the line of Humvees remained still, a silent formation of respect. The small town that had never made national news was now frozen in disbelief. Neighbors stepped off porches, phones still filming, whispers turning into gasps. An elderly woman holding an American flag wiped her eyes. A teen lowered his phone and stood taller. The 2 officers stayed behind, visibly shaken. One tried to speak. The other just looked down, the badge on his chest suddenly feeling heavier than ever before. As Walter reached the end of the street, a child holding his father's hand shouted, "Thank you, sir." Walter gave a small salute, nothing flashy. Just enough for that little boy to understand that real heroes don't need to shout. They just need to show up. He turned onto the main road and continued toward the town center where the National Guard event was still waiting. They had delayed the ceremony, uncertain whether he'd make it. But now they stood at attention. As Walter rode in, soldiers snapped to salute, Citizens clapped, and Captain Carter announced, "Let it be known, this man is not just a veteran. He is our legacy." Walter took the stage in his riding jacket without script or medals. His voice cracked slightly as he said, "Respect isn't about titles. It's about how you treat people when you think no one's watching. I didn't need to be rescued. I just needed to be seen." The room erupted, and somewhere in the back, a woman whispered to her son, "That's the kind of man you grow up to be." As Walter stepped off the stage, the applause still echoing, the mayor approached, visibly shaken by what had transpired that day. He extended his hand with an unsteady voice. "Mr. Jennings, I had no idea." Walter looked him in the eye. "That's the problem. Too many people don't." There wasn't anger in his tone, just truth. The mayor took the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, from this day forward, let it be recorded, June 8th will be recognized as Veteran Recognition Day in our town. We don't just honor military service in hindsight. We honor it while our heroes are still here to hear it." The crowd erupted again, louder this time with meaning. Outside, the two officers who had stopped Walter stood off to the side, still trying to make sense of what happened. One of them, the younger of the two, slowly approached Walter after the ceremony. "I didn't know who you were, sir," he said. Walter looked him in the eyes and replied, "You don't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect." The officer nodded, humbled. "You taught me more in 1 hour than I learned in years wearing this badge." Walter patted him on the shoulder. "Then don't waste it. Teach the others." That night, Walter sat alone outside the armory, watching the sunset spill across the fields he once rode through in silence. Captain Carter sat beside him, helmet in hand. "You didn't have to say anything," she said. "I didn't," Walter replied. "My life did." In that silence, the two veterans shared the kind of peace only those who've been through fire truly understand. As darkness fell, a crowd gathered again outside the armory. Families, veterans, children with flags, teens with cameras. One by one, people lit candles, not for mourning, but for honor. A tribute not to a tragedy, but to a man who reminded them of what dignity looks like. Walter Jennings never asked for recognition. He just wanted to ride in peace. But when the peace was stolen, he didn't retaliate with violence. He answered with legacy. The video of Walter's stop and the dramatic arrival of the National Guard convoy spread faster than wildfire. Within 24 hours, it had 15 million views on every major platform. Headlines read, "Decorated Army vet stopped." "By police, what happens next? Shocks the nation." "Humvees roll in after cop stops the wrong man. He served in silence. America just heard him loud." Morning shows called. News anchors begged for interviews. Celebrities reposted the footage, calling Walter a symbol of quiet strength. But Walter didn't care about the attention. He only agreed to one interview with a local high school journalism student who asked him the most important question: "Why didn't you raise your voice?" Walter smiled, weathered and calm. "Because if I had to raise my voice, it meant they weren't ready to hear the truth." Meanwhile, police departments across the country began hosting emergency training on bias awareness. The story was printed in police academies. A new policy was adopted in 4 states requiring veteran identification protocol during stops. Walter's calm changed policy. His silence roared across systems. Back in town, murals went up overnight. One showed Walter standing next to his bike, Humvees behind him, 2 cops in shadow. Above him, the words, "I served without glory, but I ride with honor." Local children began sending letters to Walter. One read, "Dear Mr. Jennings, I want to be like you when I grow up. Not because you're tough, but because you're fair." Jordan, age 11, Walter opened each letter one by one, quietly, with reverence. as if each was a medal that meant more than anything he'd worn in uniform. Captain Carter called again a week later. "We've got a ceremony in D.C. They want to give you something." Walter chuckled. "Only if I can ride there myself." And he did. He arrived in Washington, D.C. on that same bike. No fanfare, no escort, just Walter Jennings and the hum of justice behind him. Waiting at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial stood a line of veterans, young, old, scarred, strong. They saluted in unison as he approached. Walter looked up at Lincoln. "We're still trying," he whispered, because that's what he did. He rode. He showed up. He reminded a divided world that dignity isn't something you demand. It's something you carry. Walter's ride to D.C. didn't go unnoticed. As he passed through small towns, veterans stood at overpasses holding flags. School children waved handmade signs. "Thank you, Mr. Jennings." Fire trucks parked along highways with ladders raised in salute. Local police departments, aware of who he was now, escorted him with respect, not suspicion. By the time he arrived at the Lincoln Memorial, he wasn't alone. Over 300 riders, many of them veterans, had joined him along the route. They called it the Jennings Ride. At the steps of the memorial, with television cameras and military officials watching, Walter stepped off his bike. He didn't wear his medals. He didn't dress in military blues, just a black jacket, dusty jeans, and boots that had seen every kind of battlefield. The Secretary of Defense handed him a plaque, but Walter waved it off. "I didn't come here for that," he said softly. "I came to finish my ride." Then he turned to the crowd, thousands now, and raised his voice for the first time. "This story wasn't supposed to matter, but it does, not because I'm special, but because too many people are treated like I was and don't have a convoy to show up for them. I'm not the hero here. The heroes are the ones who saw what was wrong and rode anyway. So don't just honor me. Ride for the next one. Show up for the next one. Because somewhere out there is a kid on a bike, a woman in uniform, a man with gray in his beard, and they're praying someone sees them before it's too late." A deep silence followed. Then the crowd erupted, not in applause, but in something deeper. A wave of understanding. Veterans cried. Police chiefs stood in reflection. And lawmakers in attendance realized that they were witnessing more than a speech. They were witnessing a movement. Aftermath. A legacy begins. The Jennings Act was passed in 3 states within a month, requiring officers to conduct pre-stop military status checks when license plates are linked to veteran benefits. Universities across the country launched Walter Jennings scholarships for children of veterans. And on the anniversary of the day Walter was stopped, the National Guard now hosts a ride every year called Show Up Day. Walter returned home eventually. Same house, same bike, same quiet demeanor, but something had changed. Now, every time he rides through town, people wave. Not because he's famous, but because they know better now. Because respect doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it just rides a quiet bike, with a back straight and a soul unshaken. Months passed. Walter Jennings never cashed in on fame. He declined book deals, refused to appear on morning shows, and politely turned down documentary offers. "I already wrote my story," he said once. "I just used pavement instead of paper." But the impact, it didn't fade. One afternoon, a father brought his teenage son to Walter's home. The boy had been caught vandalizing a veteran memorial, not out of hate, but ignorance. Walter didn't lecture. He didn't scold. He took the boy on a ride, helmet on, bike humming. They cruised past cemeteries, through back roads, and into the heart of the veteran neighborhood. They visited the VA hospital. A man with one arm saluted the teen. Another whispered, "Thank you," with eyes clouded from injury. After 2 hours, they pulled up to the memorial the boy had spray-painted. Walter turned off the engine and simply said, "Now do you know what that stone means?" The boy nodded, eyes full of tears. "It means somebody showed up." Walter handed him a rag and bucket. Together, they cleaned the stone in silence. Word spread. Walter became more than a symbol. He became a mentor. Young officers started stopping by his porch for advice. Veterans brought their sons to hear him speak. One girl, just 12, said she wanted to be a soldier because of him. And yet, Walter never changed. He still rode alone at sunrise, still nodded at the flag with quiet reverence, still parked his bike outside the diner every Sunday, where strangers bought his coffee and never asked for a picture. Because Walter Jennings had become something rarer than famous. He had become a mirror, reflecting to every person the question, how do you treat someone before you know who they are? And in towns across America, that question began to matter, because of one wrong stop, because of one silent ride, because of one man who stood calm while the world watched. 1 year later, a quiet ceremony took place at the very same stretch of rural road where it all began. The local town had renamed the street. The new sign read, Jennings Way, where honor rolled in. Walter didn't attend the ceremony. He was riding, not out of pride, but because he didn't need to be there to be remembered. Instead, standing under that sign was a new generation of officers, fresh out of the academy, led by the very officer who once stopped Walter on that road, now reformed. And recommitted, he spoke to the crowd. I made a mistake, but Mr. Jennings gave me something rare, the chance to fix it. He didn't humiliate me, he educated me. And now I train every officer under me to treat people not as suspects, but as someone's hero they haven't met yet. The crowd was silent, listening, feeling, understanding. That officer had become a national voice for police reform. His TED Talk, titled The Man I Stopped Changed My Badge, went viral, not because he was a hero, but because he was honest, and it all traced back to a single moment. One man, one ride, one refusal to be angry when dignity was enough. Years later, Walter sat on a bench outside a small elementary school. The principal had asked him to speak to the 5th graders, but instead of a speech, he told a story. Once, a man was stopped because someone saw what they feared, not who he was. But that man had something stronger than anger. He had patience. He had truth. He had history riding with him. One little girl raised her hand. Mr. Jennings, were you scared? Walter smiled. Scared? No. I've been through worse, but I was disappointed. Why? She asked. He leaned forward, eyes soft. Because I thought we were further than that. She nodded thoughtfully, then whispered, We'll get us further. He nodded back. Yes, you will. Epilogue. Legacy set in motion. Decades later, when Walter Jennings passed peacefully in his sleep at 83, he didn't want a parade. He didn't want a folded flag in a glass case. He asked for one thing. Make the ride bigger next year. And so, every June 8th, thousands ride across America. Veterans, civilians, police officers, teachers, truck drivers, kids on scooters. They all wear a patch that says, Show up, ride with honor. And at the front of every line, a lone black motorcycle rides first. Its headlight always on, its path always clear. No music, no flags, no speeches, just the sound of engines, and the silence that follows, when respect is finally understood. So, the next time you see someone riding alone, don't just see the bike, see the journey, see the sacrifice. See the story behind the silence, because some men don't carry rank on their shoulders anymore. They carry lessons in the way they walk, the way they ride, the way they forgive. Walter Jennings didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight back. He simply showed up and reminded an entire nation of what dignity looks like when no one's watching, and what strength looks like when the whole world finally is. This wasn't just about a stop. It was a start, a spark, a signal that how we treat each other matters.